I'm 22, 23 years old. I'm sitting in progress meetings with CEOs, business owners, CFOs, decision makers. I love understanding people and why we make the decisions that we do and what motivates us. I've got to kind of level myself up. I come from humble beginnings, a single parent mom, 3 kids, whole up and downs associated with that. But I've been blessed along the way to just come across the right people at the right time. There were a couple of weeks where we were homeless. I really thought about that journey with my mom and observing her, the sheer tenacity, that level and that ability to dig deep and grind. Whatever it is I put my heart into, I should do it at the highest levels possible.
So you started with 1 employee, and now you have how many?
So now we're just about 50 employees as a team, and we clipped over the $100 million mark as a company. There's some immense power into that inner voice.
Welcome to Courage, Comebacks, and Conversations. I'm Susan Lee, business leader, life and career coach, storyteller, wife, and mother. We're bringing you real stories. From athletes chasing their dream to entrepreneurs who left corporate America to start their own business, professionals rebuilding after setbacks, from women breaking barriers in male-dominated fields, and to first in their families who graduate from college. Every story reminds us that courage connects us, and who doesn't like to hear a comeback story? I'm glad you're here. Let's get into it. Welcome to Courage, Comebacks, and Conversations. Today's conversation is with Jeremiah Watts from D. Watts Construction, a leader whose journey is rooted in humble beginnings, shaped by people who poured into him, and anchored by his faith. We're talking about the courage it takes to lead, the comebacks that refine you, and the conversations that help you build more than spaces. They help you build people, purpose, and a life that's aligned with what matters most. So I'd like to introduce you to Jeremiah Watts. Hello, Jeremiah.
Hey, Susan. It's good to be here. Great to see you.
Awesome. Hey, Jeremiah, as we get started into this, tell everyone what D. Watts Construction is.
Sure. So D. Watts Construction, we are recently celebrating our 10th year in business, so big milestone year for us. But we're a collection of former large company men and women who've come together over the last 10 years and to really kind of challenge the status quo of what it means to be a good general contractor and partner. In the construction industry, pretty proud of the journey and how we've done it, how we've grown, focusing on reputation, doing it the right way. And so, yeah, it's been a great journey. We primarily based here in the Washington, D.C. region, and our bread and butter work in the area is high end, high design, complex and fast track commercial interior spaces in the region. So.
Well, what I'd like to tell you is my former company that I worked for, you actually did our space, and it was phenomenal. In fact, it's like a premier space in the Washington, D.C. area where people do go and are very impressed with the work you've done. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So, Jeremiah, tell me what makes Jeremiah Jeremiah. Tell me a little bit about how you grew up and how life began for you.
Sure. So I'm a local guy, originally born and raised in Maryland. I come from humble beginnings, frankly, a single parent mom, 3 kids, whole up and downs associated with that. But I've been blessed along the way to just come across the right people at the right time to kind of keep me, knock some sense into me here and there, keep me straight along the way. I fell in love with football at a young age. And I went on to play collegiate football up north at Brown University. And upon graduating, a mentor of mine actually got me connected to the industry. And that's how I ended up in our industry.
Okay, so we talk a lot about football in here because, I have a football family. So what position did you play?
So I was a linebacker in college.
You were a linebacker. Impressive. Played 4 years?
I did. I played all 4 years up at Brown. And had a ball, had a great time. Still keep in touch with a few core teammates, and including one of my best friends to this day. So a lot of good memories.
So what did you major in?
So it was the study of organizations and behavior. It was called PPSO, Public and Private Sector Organizations. And interesting how I landed there. Like, I actually love psychology. When I went to undergrad, I originally wanted to study psychology. I love understanding people and why we make the decisions that we do and what motivates us. And then I kind of, I think I realized early on, though, I didn't know how practical the degree was going to be. And so I found this other degree around understanding businesses and organizations and why they make the decisions they make. And I said, you know what, this is close enough and maybe a little bit more practical if I saw myself getting into the business world at some point. And so, yeah, that's what I studied. And it's interesting, the just some of the things you learn or the things you pick up in an undergrad degree, you don't know how it translates. But now all these years later, as a business owner running a growing organization and constantly, hitting the clouds on strategy and making those decisions, it's been pretty cool to see how some of the book knowledge back then actually applies to some of what we do now.
Okay, so you graduated from school, and where did you go from there? Tell us the journey from college to where your first job.
Yeah, so I can't tell this story without introducing one of those pivotal people that kind of came into my life at the right time. It was a commercial real estate guy, a guy named Tony Gould with Newmark Knight. He ended up becoming a mentor of mine at Brown and stayed in touch constantly. And when I was my senior year, he asked me what I wanted to do, and I didn't really know. I gave him kind of the typical, investment banking, consulting, just kind of the jobs that everyone talked about. And he said, well, have you ever considered commercial real estate? And I hadn't. And he introduced me to HIT Contracting at the time and told me, well, maybe it's something I should think about. I consider, and I did. And so long story short, he made an introduction. He opened up a door. One thing led to the next, and then out of school, I ended up accepting a job at HIT Contracting.
So what did you do?
So starting at HIT, I was very green. I actually spent my first year or so just out in the field trying to figure it out. Whatever superintendents needed, whether it was sweeping or going to grab their coffee or running around and just trying to be helpful. Really trying to stay out of the way more than anything. But it was good. It was a great foundation, just being out in the field, hands-on, seeing what our guys go through and the ups and downs and the challenges to just kind of being there was great. And then I transitioned to the office as an assistant project manager. And I immediately just fell in love kind of with the industry and with the role. There wasn't at the time, I'm 23 years old. And there weren't many jobs that I could think of where all of a sudden, I'm sitting in progress meetings with CEOs, business owners, CFOs, decision makers, right, for these companies that we were, helping to build and deliver, one of the most important things to them at the time. That's their commercial office space, right? It's the new space for their employees and big milestones in their own journeys. And it's a very important decision, right? And so being able to kind of sit at the tables and then eventually becoming the lead, project manager running those jobs and helping to bring their kind of dreams to life. It was really cool. And it really challenged me at an early age to like, wow, I've got to kind of level myself up to just, even if it was pretending that I deserved to be in that room at that table with these very important people, right? And so it was pretty cool. And, I loved and I embraced that challenge at the time. And I just fell in love with our industry and, really got exposed to all the great opportunities, all the great people. And, it's one of the hidden, I think, secrets is just how much talent exists in this industry and how much opportunity exists in commercial real estate.
So for those out there that may or may not understand what a project manager does for HIT Contracting in commercial real estate, can you just break it down a little bit for them? What would that role look like?
Yeah. So as a project manager, I was responsible for, not only helping to kind of create and inform the budget and the pricing associated with these jobs. And, I worked very closely with end users and clients who were trying to manage their vision versus what they could afford versus schedule, and being a thought partner up front to kind of help them, achieve the goals in all of those buckets right along the way. So heavily involved in the planning, the pre-planning leading up to these build outs. And then, once we got going on the build outs, really managing the week to week from getting all your materials there to the job site to problem solving in real time and having to do it very quickly because these are fast paced, fast moving projects. And then at the end of the day, still having to be able to do it at a high level to make sure everybody was happy and high-fiving at the end. And so really that was the training ground. And doing, a lot of them, commercial interiors, these projects move very quickly. So you also get exposed to a lot of them through the course of a year. And so, you multiply that, 12 years at HIT, out of school, focusing on the same thing. It was a great learning ground, kind of build my own foundation in the industry.
What's one lesson that you learned while you were there that you could pass on to someone else who might just be beginning in a project management firm or even beginning in a high-pressured, fast-paced job? What's one thing you can tell them?
Yeah, I think one bit of advice I like to give, especially to kind of up-and-comers or new folks in the industry. I remember early on as a young guy feeling this pressure to kind of almost like pretend like I knew more than what I knew, or like to pretend that I deserved to be in the room. And, I think after a couple of years, though, I think I recognized that it's okay not to know the answer. It's okay not to be, the best or, whatever in your mind you think you need to be. Sometimes it's okay just to be your authentic self, because I think at the end of the day, what people appreciate and respect is when they see that you're doing your best, and, generally you're doing it at a pretty solid level. And you know what? They don't expect perfection. They don't expect you to have all the answers. And so I think just kind of getting, I think it's a learning curve that a lot of us go through, but just kind of taking some of the pressure off yourself a little earlier, and just kind of understanding that, recognizing that. And I think it's good for your own sanity.
So I love that, being your authentic self and not being afraid to ask questions. And, people don't expect you to know everything when you're young and you're just starting out. And the ultimate compliment is when you can ask someone questions, because then they recognize that you're drawing upon their wisdom to help you grow. So it's okay for that. So, as we're talking about people and leaders, mentors come to mind for me. We talk a lot on this show about mentors. So tell me a little bit about mentorship for you. You mentioned someone that helped you when you were leaving college, but mentors can be family members. They can be coaches. They can be, people that you come in contact with over the course of your life. Talk to me a little bit about your mentors.
Yeah, I've never had kind of a long-standing relationship with a mentor per se, but what I do recognize is, there's these seasons where folks come into your lives where you needed them in that moment. And whether it's a bit of advice or a season of being around and providing some guidance. And there's a couple that jump out to me in particular. I mentioned I fell in love with football at an early age, and I had a couple of coaches, and one stood out. It was my high school coach. Kind of going into high school, and this guy just kind of really, Coach Rick. He not only pushed us hard on the field, but he was somebody that also recognized the importance of just being good people off the field. Not only in your books and your education, but just being good rounded people. And he was somebody who kind of really pushed that in a point in my life when I needed it. I wasn't the best student actually walking into high school. And frankly, I was getting in a bit more trouble than, I'm proud of to admit today, even before then. But I think with that guidance in that moment, just kind of helping me being a more kind of take a look at it more holistically and be, trying to be my best in multiple areas, was an important point for me, and somebody who really influenced me at that stage. And then I mentioned Tony Gould, who's somebody who I connected with towards the end of college into my early career. There's a guy at HIT that jumps out to me, a guy named Brian Chris, who ended up running corporate interiors. And he was one of the first person that he was a senior guy at HIT, but he saw a young guy myself with some talent and potential. And I struggle with, trying to see that maybe I do fit in this industry in a company like HIT. And he's somebody that kind of helped kind of pull me aside and just kind of remind and whisper that, you do belong here and you're talented enough to do well here. And just through the years, it's what I needed in that season to kind of keep me going in this industry. And then, fast forward, I think the last few years, just having folks who've seen what we're trying to do here at D. Watts now as a company, and who have reached out, unasked to kind of sit down and try to provide words of wisdom, whether it's folks like, Linda Rabbit of RAND, or Ernie Jarvis, at Savills and folks like that who kind of come across and just, inspiring. But at the same time, just kind of reaching back and kind of passing along some of their wisdom to, I think, the next generation. And that's how I kind of see myself and what we're trying to do here. So it's been great, and it's certainly appreciated along the way.
So I'm going to backtrack you just a second, because you mentioned coming from a single parent home with 3 kids. I can only imagine, what did you learn from what you saw your mother go through that you brought forward with you into your profession or into your life today?
I came across a concept recently where someone asked me to think about, what's the legacy that your parents left you, willing or not, or, on purpose or not. And one of the biggest things that came out for me as I really thought about that journey with my mom and observing her was just the sheer tenacity and just like that level and that ability to dig deep and grind and kind of climb herself and our family out of a hole at every step along the way. And just, it was impressive, whether it's working, night shifts and waking up and cooking breakfast and dropping kids off to, working part-time in the afternoons and still racing home to take us to practice, and then doing it for years without complaint, and like not fully appreciating that as a kid. But as I've gotten older, it's just like, there's no way I don't think I could have done that, or I could do that today. And so it's just pretty cool kind of recognizing that. And then, my dad, who was in and out of my life, through his own kind of journey and things. But, I recognize when I thought about the same question for him, just his ability to see the good in any situation, like to find the light, to find the silver lining, to be able to laugh and smile despite, is something that sticks with me to this day. And again, it's just something that I appreciate, in them, and whether I knew it or not, they became large parts of who I am, and that make up what I do and how I do it to this day. So it's pretty cool to recognize that.
You want to say a big thank you to your mom right now?
Mom, thank you.
So, I know that you have a foundation of faith. Can we talk a little bit about how faith plays into your life? Like, how does it integrate into your life?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. I mentioned my upbringing a little bit. Again, it without going down to it, it had its challenges. One thing I kind of recognize, it was in some cases it was so low. Frankly, I didn't see a way out without some sort of higher power help. And I think I recognized that early on, though, despite the chaos and despite the noise of like, I need something, magical, not magical, but something more than I can provide, and as miraculous. There you go. That I can bring to the table based on my limited resources, my limited ability, my limited, knowledge or whatever have you, to help me, get through this. And then at one point, maybe even, have some success in whatever that was. And so, I've bounced around as a child. There were moments where there were a couple of weeks where we were homeless, just to kind of give you a little sprinkle of like what I mean there. And so there was this recognition that there was a higher power, and that, this could be the way out. And so like that's where the foundation for me started, is just that recognition, and developing my own faith as a young guy in the midst of it all was important for me to find that. It wasn't anybody pushing it on me. It was just a recognition that I think that this is my way to figure it out. And then, so combining that with, there was a line in the Bible that as a young guy, I came across that always stuck, but it's like Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if you're working for the Lord, not for men. And like, that was like such a small thing, but I internalized that to mean, okay, whatever it is I put my heart into, I should do it at the highest levels possible. So at the time, right, whether it's my schooling at the time, I'm just going to roll up my sleeves and dig in as I enter high school. I was a C student before I got to high school, but with that mentality, by the end of high school, I'm proud to say, I was a straight A student all the way through. 4.0 average before I went up to Brown, to like applying that to football. And you know what, this next rep, I'm going to run this rep as if doing it for God or doing it for something beyond it. Right. And just do it at the highest level. Right. So like that kind of became part of kind of my anchor. Right. So between faith and just like that directive to do whatever you're doing at the highest levels, because ultimately there's always somebody looking at you. And I'm the first to say, it's not me doing this. There's a higher power kind of pushing and guiding me and giving me the strength. And so, yeah, it's a huge factor. It's my foundation. It's what's driven me every step of the way, from college to football to my career to my company and everything we're trying to do. And yeah, so, it's certainly helped drive my success to this point. And frankly, it's going to be a huge kind of component into what's driving us in the future, and how we do it, and God willing, the success that's in store. So.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you. I'm in the same position. There's nothing that I did that God wasn't a part of. But let me ask you now, we went to hit, but now you took a leap. How did you get there? Tell us about when you decided you were going to go out on your own and what it took, the courage it took, the faith it took to step out and do that.
Yeah, that was a journey within itself. And so I remember probably there was about 7 or 8 years into my journey at Hit. And I started to have this thought around maybe trying to, I don't know, do something on my own, or this entrepreneur itch started to come up. But I tell you, I was terrified. Like I didn't, honestly, there was this doubt that still was there. Like I didn't think I had what it took to do it. I didn't grow up with a ton of entrepreneurs or, really successful mentors that I saw firsthand how it could be done, or that it could be done. And maybe part of that kind of doubt that was there, honestly, there was a lot of doubt. And so for the next 4 years or so, I toyed with the idea, but I was terrified to actually take the leap, to take the jump. And I tell you, I think that same thing that was holding me back ultimately started to turn into one of my biggest motivators, though, because I realized probably 4 years of going back and forth and just saying, no, I don't know. I don't think I have what it takes because, for whatever reasons. But it hit me that one of the things that I struggle with is that I never saw anyone like me in my circle pulling something like that off. And so then I started to kind of turn that around and say, well, Jeremiah, you've been blessed up to this point, whether it was with your education, this great company that you've learned the right way with, the success that you're having, the relationships that you're building. If not you, then who should be the one taking this leap? And, I struggled because I never had any mentors or uncles or relatives that did it. And so like this thing just kind of hit me where like, well, maybe I could be that source for my nephews or my cousins or my children one day. And so that actually started to become one of the biggest motivators at that point. So then, at this point, it's 11 or 12 years into the journey. I've been toying with this idea for 5 years. But that became one of the driving motivators of like, okay, what's the worst case scenario here is I unplug, I take a swing, it fizzes out in a couple of years, it doesn't work. I could always kind of plug back in and keep doing what I had been doing. But at least I'd be able to turn to a future cousin or a relative or someone else in the industry and give them some experience of like, no, it is possible. And like, this is what it took. And to be able to offer a little bit of that. And so that became one of the biggest motivators to help kind of push me, help me take that leap at the end of the day.
So how does it start? Because that's a construction company. That means you have to have employees. That means you have to be able to have equipment to do work. Like, how does that start? I mean, if someone was out there trying to do it right now, what does it take to do it?
Yeah. It's definitely scary in terms of when you start really putting it on paper, like what's it going to take and how much investment and how much you got to have stored away to kind of ride out the first year or two. And there's another question I struggled with when I was part of the big guy who had been around, for many years and had a great reputation. You question how much of my success is really, connected to me personally, and how much is it just, no, I'm just kind of riding the wave. I'm part of the big machine that's kind of got it all figured out. And so you don't really know the answer to that too. So that's also another part that you struggle with before you take that leap. And, I will say, I was pleasantly surprised as I unplugged how much the relationships and connections and trust that had been built over time personally with a lot of the market actually contributed and very quickly to our early success. And so that was a pleasant surprise that, again, I didn't know really going in, but it's a piece that certainly was better than expected, which is pretty cool to see. And as you know, the Washington, D.C. region, like a lot of regions, but relationships, trust really matter, right? At the end of the day. And so people trusted me. My business partner's a great guy. He had a similar reputation, Dave Doherty, in town. He had spent a number of years in the law firm space. And then, we ended up, there was one senior super who came over with us who actually kind of came banging on our door once he heard I was leaving, and he wanted to be part of what we were doing. And so it started as a team of three. We were wearing a lot of hats, but we figured, you know what, we've kind of got the foundation, and we just organically, slowly, job at a time. It started with us three. And slowly, when we were ready, we pulled in the first hire, an assistant project manager, another superintendent, and just very organically kind of started to grow from there. But the one thing we stayed really focused on was just focusing what was in front of us and doing it at the highest levels possible, and just recognize that if we can do that, then the work and momentum would continue. And that was kind of how we got started to get it going. And so, yeah.
So you started with one employee, and now you have how many?
So now we're just about 50 employees as a team. And a couple of years back, we clipped over the $100 million mark as a company. I believe that put us in kind of the top 15 interior focused GCs in the region. And so, yeah, it's been cool. Especially because we've never been a firm to chase volume at all. Like, it's never been part of our North Star or our vision. It has really been focused and anchored on just like doing the best job possible for what's in front of us in this moment, and just trusting that the growth will continue to come. And it's pretty cool to see how that's played itself out.
Now, you mentioned being in business for 10 years, and I congratulate you on year 10. How did you navigate COVID? What did you do with your employees? And what would you say? Well, let's just start there. How did you navigate that?
Man, that was scary. Remember that? COVID, when it hit, the world just quickly started falling apart. Then you heard Tom Hanks had it. You were like, oh my gosh, this is officially over then. But yeah, it was wild, right? I remember, literally that week, and like the world was shutting down. Every project we had all of a sudden, like, turned the knob off. It was like, and so there was like a couple weeks where I remember doing like emergency, plan B, plans, trying to figure what that looked like. And it was just like, okay, how much money do we have in the bank? How long can we afford, right, to cover salaries? And then, it was bad, but then it's like, okay, what's the first layer that we've got to let go? What's the second layer? And like, that was wild times. And I think a lot of us were going through that, and at the time. And so, one of the things I was thankful for there, though, honestly, is being in control of the ship and being able to just be in a smaller, flatter organization. And frankly, just being able to kind of, have quiet time, pray on the moment, and just be flexible and be able to move quickly and make the decisions that we needed to make to ride that storm. And what's interesting is not only did we ride that storm, there was that initial bump, but then coming out of that year is when we had our best year ever, right? And then we rode it, and then we continued to kind of maintain pretty well and coming out of that. And so, but it was scary, no doubt about it. It was scary times for a lot of us.
Yeah. I mean, being in that area, I mean, I think even being in the Washington, D.C. area, we benefited much greater than across the country as well. I've seen some of your employees. You employ a lot of young people. You have a lot of young talent, which I think is great. What do you look for in employees when you hire them?
Yeah, I think at its core, I think two things really jump out to me. I think one, there's got to be like this innate pursuit of excellence that you can connect with, because that's how we're wired. That's how I'm wired. To do it, to question, is this as good as it can be done? And honestly chase that, right? But the second piece is you also got to be humble, and you got to have some humility about yourself, and be open to learning and thinking a little differently, and not pretend, not saying you got it all figured out, or questioning when people are trying to give you thoughts and advice. So I think those two, having that combination of, pursuit of excellence, but also doing it with humility and being always trying to learn and grow and be open to that is at its core. Those are the people that I found. It's fun now at this point. We've got folks that have been here for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And so we're starting to kind of get that consistency, and it's really part of our culture here at DWATS. So now as new folks come in, they're surrounded by it. And it's nice. We've got this iron sharpens iron culture. But we make sure we leave enough room for, humility and to be open and to challenge ourselves to get better, which has been great.
That certainly sounds like a football term to me, if I ever heard one. Iron sharpening iron. Okay, so you're a $100 million organization, which is phenomenal in 10 years. How do you balance work? You're a principal at your company. You're married. You have 2 kids. How do you balance that?
That's a great question. Not easily. I'll start there. But I think it starts with being intentional around, for me, one thing I connected with early on was this idea of really, actually, I tie it back to that, I mentioned Coach Rick in high school, and having being more balanced around like the things that matter, right? Individually, but also looking at your life. And for me, it's always been really taking a look, I want to be the best father I can be. I want to be the best husband. I want to obviously lean into the career thing. I want to pay attention to my own physical health and like, how am I doing there mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually? And so really kind of looking at the whole pie, not getting too focused, narrowly focused on one of those slices, i.e. career, and you don't pay enough attention to the other ones. And so, I think it starts with like, I've always had a pretty good, well-rounded framework of, it's important to me to have some balance throughout it all, and to pay attention to all these slices and not, and not ignore any one of them for very long. And so, part of what my own kind of routine has been, this is going back 20 years or so now, but every year I walk into the year and I actually look at each of those slices, and I say, I try to establish goals for each slice, right? For myself individually, and my physical health, or like my relationship health, or like my friends, or, and so like, that's been part of it. It's being very intentional around, one, recognizing the importance of that balance, and really being intentional to create the space and put your money where your mouth is type of thing. And like, if these are priorities, really create the routines and the structure that allow myself to invest in each of those buckets. And so, I'm pretty proud of the fact that, one thing I told myself when I first started DWATS is I didn't want my kids to feel like, a daddy he's the entrepreneur who's always gone. He's successful, but he's always gone. Like, I did not want that to come out of their lips either. And so, I've made a point over the last 10 years to generally be there with them in the morning and be home for dinner, or at least to make sure I spend a few minutes with them before I tuck them in every single day over the last 10 years to have that balance, because it's important to me. And so, really that's kind of been the way I've looked at it, and yeah, again, just kind of proud to see how we're doing it in a balanced manner.
I applaud you for that. And for any business owner out there, take a page out of Jeremiah's book in prioritizing. Look at the beginning of the year, set aside little portions of time for each, and prioritize your family, because you only have a little bit of time to raise those kids before they're out of your house. And so it's
Quickly realizing that. I'm quickly realizing that.
And it's important. It's important to instill those values before they leave your home and enter into the world, and especially into the work world. Okay, so I want to ask you something. Like, you're at 100 million. What does DWATS look like 5 years from now in your mind?
That's a good question, because I continue to battle with that a little bit the last couple of years, honestly. As I try to be balanced as we go forward. But one of the things that I really kind of gravitated towards is, we've had some success as a company in this region. And one of the things that I've appreciated is that we didn't create DWATS to try to go copy and do what everybody else was doing. We are doing it our way, in our own little ways. And I've recognized that, this industry needs a bit of a makeover. Just historically, when people think of commercial real estate and construction in particular, right, there are some stereotypes, some beliefs that are out there, right? Whether it's, our industry has not historically embraced diversity, or our industry hasn't always held integrity at the highest levels where they should be, or, this mentality to burn folks out and grind them to a pulp, right? These are all like real, and in fairness, they have been historically kind of part of what successful companies have done. I've recognized, like, we as a company have since day one challenged those stereotypes, challenged the old ways of being, and I'm seeing firsthand that, we're a company that loves diversity. We embrace it, and we want different folks from different backgrounds, from different educations. We recognize the value of that. We have pushed integrity inside and out of this organization since day one. We'd rather make a few bucks less today in order to get it done the right way, because we're playing long ball, and or relationships and collaboration, and trying to find some balance internally, not like grinding our people to the ground. And you know what? This is how we're made up. And I'm seeing firsthand that this can be successful. And so what I think the vision that's kind of starting to come together here is that I think the industry needed a DWATS. And I think, frankly, that this industry needs a firm like ours. And there's others that are thinking, kind of changing the old way of thinking, but they need organizations like ours to grow bigger, to have a bigger voice, to continue to show that this can be done another way, and we could still have success. Because frankly, like, when I think about some of the biggest challenges that our nation faces, when you think about the housing crisis that we are dealing with, or infrastructure that needs to be revamped around this country. Now you've got data centers and the requirements there, but the reality is, there's not enough new energy coming to our industry. There hasn't been for the last 20 and 30 years. And without it, like, we are never going to solve some of these countries' biggest problems. And so I think what this industry needs, this is where I'm becoming really passionate about it, is like, to solve those problems, we need to give this industry a makeover so that this next generation can see it as more attractive. And so, the more I think about what's next for DWATS as a company, I like the idea of us, being a voice to help kind of change that narrative, and to continue to bring in and attract the talent that, frankly, not only we as a company or this industry needs, but that this country needs to solve some of these problems. And so that's really where it's all going. A long-winded way to say, like, I'm getting kind of pumped up about that, whether it's the next 5 years or 10 years, but being a bigger voice in that conversation.
I was going to ask you what your legacy was, but I think you just explained it to me. You just mentioned, making change in the, in the industry, and bringing more energy into it, and humility, and, professionalism. I think you You are the perfect person to do that. Okay, so last thing I want to ask you before we hop off is, what words of wisdom would you give someone out there who's wanting to take the leap, start a business? They might work for one of the larger construction companies. They might work for one of the smaller ones, but they're looking to do something like this. What wisdom could you share with them?
Yeah, there's a lot of bits of wisdom I can probably, you know what, I'll share something that I've realized really kind of gravitated towards in the last year or so. And that's this concept that I'm realizing that in each of us, there's, and not to get religious on anybody, but like, I think we all have like this inner spirit, whether it's the Holy Spirit, whether it's your inner spirit, that inner voice, that inner wisdom comes from wherever it comes from. But I do believe we all have it in us that can help level us up in so many areas, that can help provide guidance in so many areas. You know, Susan, you started with mentors and talking about mentors. And I've realized the power and, you know, I think that inner voice and that spirit should be right up there with any mentor that any one of us goes out and finds, because I do believe it's there. I think a lot of times, right, with all the noise around us, our thoughts, our emotions, how we're aching, our physical selves, like we don't create the space to tap into that kind of inner voice. And so if there's one bit of wisdom that I'd leave to anybody at this point, I'd say to try to reduce some of the other noise and try to get connected with that inner voice, that inner spirit, whatever you want to call it, to not only guide, but inform and be there as a constant companion, whatever it is you're focused on and wherever you're going. I think there's some immense power in that. So whether you're starting out your career, you're trying to figure out your career, you're trying to maneuver or wade through that career or family or whatever it is, that's probably the one bit of advice that's very near to me in this moment that I'll share.
Thank you. And, you know, one thing I remember about you, it may have been last year we were having this conversation. You said, I shut off LinkedIn, I shut things down. And I remember that now. And that to me now confirms why you did it, so that you could hear and get wisdom for what you were looking to do that year, because I think it was at the beginning of the year that you were doing that. Yeah. So one last thing. You want to shout your family out, your kids, mention their names?
Yeah, first it starts with my wife, who, you know, behind every great, you know, business person story, my wife, Beata, aka B Money, she holds it down back home with the kids, and just the home that we have is incredible. And my three kiddos, Jaden, Jasmine, and Julia. And I can't forget Buddy, my dog, Buddy, who thinks he's the fourth child, for sure. And so I'll even give him a shout out. So thanks for that.
All right. Well, Jeremiah, thank you for this. You have done an amazing job of sharing your story with people. And as we close, I hope today's conversation reminds you, anyone out there, that leadership isn't just about what you build. It's about who you become in the process. The leap of faith doesn't always come with certainty, but it does come with growth, clarity, and purpose when it's anchored in faith. Whether you're building a business, a family, a team, a new season of life, remember the most meaningful work is often happening beneath the surface. Thank you for joining us for Building More Than Spaces, a Leader's Leap of Faith with Jeremiah Watts. Join us for the next episode of Courage, Comebacks, and Conversations. You will not be disappointed, and please share this episode because it's an amazing one. So thank you, Jeremiah.
Thanks, Susan.
Chasing purpose, redefine time. Vision clear, the future near. Trusting God.